Welcome to All Things Thor with Tom Thordarson. This episode, Part 6, Becoming an Imagineer, where Tom continues his tale of working on the Journey to the Center of the Earth attraction for the Tokyo DisneySea theme park. I'm not going to say much other than it's an epic story. It's been great so far, and we can't wait to hear the next chapter. So I'll hand it over to Tom. Let him take it away.
Well, it's nice to be back and continue. This is going to be episode 6 on Becoming an Imagineer. And I hope it's starting to get interesting for you. So, now, the one thing about Imagineering, or should I say Imagineering a ride or an attraction, is that, it's without question a team effort. There's a lot of disciplines and a lot of knowledge that have to all come together and negotiate something that is a dream that becomes a reality. And so about this time, I'm continuing here to start developing the story in my mind of how this ride is going to unfold. And I start thinking about what life forms are going to be in here. What am I going to take that's literally from the story, and what things am I going to make up myself? And so again, I start coming up with this world in my brain that, in my head, has a believable scientific context that is on steroids, with a healthy pinch of fantasy. But I realized that, all the scenes that I were developing eventually were going to be changing, because as they're building this 130 some foot volcano that this ride is going to be inside of, and there's going to be structure that appears that the engineers need to go through different areas, and as the ride is laid out and kind of snaked inside this giant cone, there's going to be different corners and things that I have no way of predicting, that I'm going to have to take all my imagination that's in my head now that I think a scene is going to look like, and I have to be open-minded to adapting it to the structure as it unfolds, that it all has to fit inside of. So I just keep drawing. I just keep conceptualizing, and thought to myself, well, I'm just going to believe that I'm going to find ways to make this work. That's one of the most important things that a lot of people don't realize in more recent companies that I've consulted with, that get hung up on technology and want to immediately start doing digital models, for the architecture and everything, and stick it in a box and just make the artist fit this stuff inside this structure that doesn't know yet what's going to be inside of it. And if you look back on the classic Imagineers, the guys who created Disneyland, the Mark Davises, the Herbie Reinmans, all that, look at their concept art. And this was my argument all the time, that they're creating an experience to be the foundation of what we want the viewer, our audience, or person riding in a ride to feel. But there's so many different ways of doing it. to get that experience. I mean, you have to be creative on how to get that illustration, that painting that looks epic. And yet you're given a room half the size or with funny beams coming or columns dropping through the middle of areas you thought were going to be open scenes. You have to really be creative in how you work around those things. So, but that's okay. That's just the way it goes. And it actually can be kind of fun sometimes to try to work those problems out. So at this time, while all this was happening at the same time, the architectural and engineering structuring and everything, and I continued to do my pitches of what I thought the ride was going to be like to upper management. Michael Eisner and all those guys would pop into the Maple building for progress reviews onto where we were going with this. So did the Oriental Land Company. And so, I was already going through this ride in my brain so many times that I felt like I had ridden it for real. And each time I told the story to people and showed them my drawings, I would look at areas and think of how I was going to accomplish what that picture showed. I can draw. I mean, I can draw really well and I can paint. But that's not enough in this role. You have to be able to also be thinking how this is going to transfer into the three-dimensional world and really be something, something tangible. But I started getting some really motivational feedback from everybody. Everyone, including Marty Sklar, at that time the president of Walt Disney Imagineering, was impressed. I mean, they loved it. They loved what I had come up with, the feeling of it, and they just kept giving me like thumbs up, like just keep going, keep going, and so I just kept going. And I became obsessed with this. I'd sit there in my office and play all kinds of crazy music, and it looked like Grandpa Munster's laboratory basement had exploded because I had so many drawings and so many little study maquettes started. In clay, I was starting to figure out what the creatures were going to look like. And since I can sculpt, I was sculpting creatures, and they call them maquettes. And I was just having a ball. I mean, I just was having such a ball. And the scenes were so exciting. I mean, the subterranean sea, a cave that has an ocean in it. It's supposed to look so vast and huge, and the giant mushroom forest, and the crystal caverns, and then I came up with all these other additional scenes that never made it, were edited out later because we had to keep the ride a certain length. But I remember one I called the Cavern of the Winds, and you went through this one sort of bridge-like rock structure in your ride vehicle, kind of precariously, and it dropped all around you. You're in the middle of this cavern, going across this rocky bridge structure, and there was all these other lava tube holes in the walls all around you that were at a distance. And the idea I had was that, it was real breezy and windy in there, and that the hot air caused by all the volcanic activity and everything was blowing through all of these smaller lava tubes. So the Cavern of the Winds was this experience where all this, as I said, volcanic rushing of air coming out of these different size lava tube holes that were all around you. They would make noise like giant, you know, horns and tubas and wind instruments that were filled with different notes of deep notes and some higher pitched notes depending on the size of the lava tube perforations that they were coming out of. And so as you're going through this windy, warm, giant cavern, and this wind was blowing all over from different directions, it was this symphony of natural music, and tones and vibrato, and it was going to be really cool, you know. Cavern of the Winds. That never happened. But it was another many scenes that I came up with. That then, you know, I started to think about all these different creatures and what would exist down there. And also I'm thinking about lighting and everything, and I wanted it to be exciting. And so I had read that there were actual caves that had a lot of phosphorescent activity and things in them. Glowworms. I saw a picture in National Geographic of these glowworms that were stuck to the ceiling of this cave, and they created this weird, almost like starscape, but they were these little, there were these like caterpillars that glowed this strange greenish glow. And so I got excited about the idea of, okay, this is where my interesting lighting is going to come from. I'm gonna pretend that a lot of what we're seeing, in addition to the lava we'll eventually get to later in the ride, glowing, its warm glows and its hot molten reds and yellows and stuff, that this phosphorus and phosphorescent creatures were going to have all these beautiful, cooler, gem-like tones and colors, you know, that would glow. You know, violets and aqua greens and rich blues that looked almost like the phosphorus you see in the ocean when the waves are breaking on just that right night when the phosphorus is in the ocean water. And so I started to design these creatures with that in mind. And I just made up these creatures, but I tried to make them believable. And I remember it was so funny because the project coordinator, of course, we'd have meetings every couple of days, and the project coordinator was documenting all this stuff, and so that they could eventually be listed out, you know, for estimation and things like that. So you had to have a name for the different creatures. So I remember just pulling these names out of my head. There was, if I can remember some of them, the moss plucking skank, Skenk, I guess, which was this really weird creature, you know, like a cross between a mammal and something else, that would get underneath the giant mushrooms and pick at the moss and the gills of the mushrooms as its food source. And then there was a flying nudibranch, which was like a shell-like creature that actually had wings that could fly and then land on the sides of the walls of the caves. There were these giant Venus flytrap-like things. And then my favorite one was what I called the leaping tripedal beetle. And it basically, I don't know how to explain it because you'll never have seen anything like this before, but it was very insect-like in its body. And you can see pictures of this online. I'll tell you where eventually. But it had like, 3 long spindly legs. And the thing was about 3 to 4 feet tall, each one. And they would leap up and down. They kind of boing, boing. And you'd see them in this one scene, and part of their body had glowing membranes and everything. So you'd see at first you saw these glowing, strange shapes popping up and down. And then you realize when you got closer, it was a group of leaping tripedal beetles. And I had suggested how to make it do that by using an actuator behind them, like a boom that rod, you can call it, that was connected to the back of them on an axis, so that they stayed parallel. When they leaped up in the air, they didn't leap back, even though this rod was moving, pitching up and down. They looked like they were just leaping in the air and coming down, and then their legs would bend when they touched the ground, like they were supporting themselves. Then they would leap up again, and their legs would extend out, like a kangaroo. And again, I went to the guys who were engineering the effects and some of the animatronics, and I did all these drawings explaining all this and how I theorized it could be done. I mean, I'm not an engineer, but I have a pretty good mind for a lot of that stuff. So I would always, say, hey, this is my idea. If you have a better idea, let me know. But what do you think of this way of doing this? And many times they would say, this is awesome. We could work with this. This definitely could be done. And so again, I just did tons of drawings about the animations of these creatures, how they would move, how the moss plucking skank, when he was chewing, when you walked by, you saw one in the foreground and it would be chewing this big strand of moss, and I didn't want a mouth that just opened and closed like a puppet. I wanted it to look like it was grinding this the way, if you've ever watched a giraffe eat, or a cow, they kind of, their lower jaw kind of goes in a semicircle, and that could, because they're pulverizing, and so I even talked about that. Can we actuate this thing so that it looks like it's chewing this way and just watching us as we go by, it's enjoying its meal and kind of just keeping an eye on us. But and again, all around was these beautiful hues of phosphorus, and even the water was phosphorescent. There was water that was supposed to be like, in there, and pools of water here and there, and even the water had a constant phosphorescent glow. So it's quite a beautiful scene that when you got to that area of the mushroom forest. And again, I did a lot of drawings on those that you can see online. If you're interested in, actually one of the guys who did the most thorough job of talking to me and posting images right after the ride opened was at a website called Disney and More, by a gentleman named Alan Latte. He actually was the guy who wrote the book on the making of Euro Disneyland. He published a beautiful book with pictures and sketches and everything. A great guy. So he did a really good blog on that and there, and then that same content was ended up being on another site called Mouse Planet and a number of other different places. But if you're interested, and I'm not sure exactly why it was named or is called this, but they if you go to Disney and More and Google that, as well as tribute to Tom Thordarson, you'll see all the blogs. I think he did 3 different episodes, and I always thought tribute sounded like I had died, but that was what he chose to call it. But anyway, I always question how much I should say in each one of these episodes, because I don't want people to get bored and lose interest. Because the next one, I think, is in itself a pretty fun moment, but I'm not sure how I'm doing time-wise here. So I may just call it on this one and break it up into the next episode. After this episode, I'm just going to go ahead and record the next one, and maybe Kurt, my partner in crime on this podcast, who you'll see, you hear at the intro all the time, but you'll be seeing him more and more as we do our actual videos in the future. But I'll give these to Kurt, and maybe he might release them together or within a few days over the coming weeks. I know it's the holidays and everything, but so I'll end it right here, and I hope you look forward to episode 7. It's kind of a fun one.